Section 12.2 is all about Millard Fillmore and how he finished the presidency of Zachary Taylor. So he's only going to serve out the rest of Zachary Taylor's presidency and not be elected to further terms as president. There will be an abrupt political shift under his presidency. Taylor was a slave owner, but Fillmore was very much against slavery. He will ask Zachary Taylor's cabinet to resign once he is named president, and he will appoint Daniel Webster as Secretary of State. Stephen Douglas of Illinois will support him, and which is good because Douglas is one of those individuals that has been groomed by Henry Clay to take over. Henry Clay was getting older. Henry Clay was also getting ill. He was sick at that time, and so he couldn't really push through the omnibus bill again. So he's going to hand that over to Stephen Douglas to take over, in hopes that Douglas can get it passed. John C. Calhoun then dies during that same transition period. And since Henry Clay is too ill to speak to Congress, Douglas does what he can to break it up. And so he's going to break up the omnibus bill into 5 separate packages. And what he's going to do is he's going to go out to Congress and he's going to talk to them. And he's going to find out what they perceive is the biggest problem with the omnibus bill. And they find that what they disliked the most was that of California coming in as a slave state. And so that is what he's going to go after first. Each side disliked specific provisions, and so they hope that the Compromise of 1850, which is this packet of 5 bills, would be a temporary fix over the next 10 years while they kind of figure things out. After a lot of discussion, they pass California coming in as a free state. So California gets admitted as a free state. The bill, that was the hardest part of the whole thing. It really caused an imbalance now between free and slave states. So there are more free states than there are slave states. They're going to grant territorial status to New Mexico. Texas gives up its claim to New Mexico but receives debt relief in compensation. So that is the second one, dealing with New Mexico itself. So New Mexico comes in as a territory and Texas gets money to let it go. Also in the second packet is where they're going to set up the borders of Texas, because Texas had been kind of wishy-washy up to that point on what their borders were going to be. So this really sets up what it is. Then the Utah Act will set up the territory of Utah, where they decide to come in as a free state because of popular sovereignty. They're going to abolish the slave trade, but not slavery in Washington, D.C. So now we've got the 4 big things. And how did all of this come to pass if the South is so dead set against it? Well, that's where we get the fugitive slave law. And it is the biggest part of the whole thing. What most people had issues with going forward after this. We had to pass the fugitive slave law to get the South on their side for that of the other bills. It is the most controversial of all the acts. All runaway slaves were to be brought back to their masters. Fugitives could not testify on their own behalf. They were not allowed no trial by jury. The movie 12 Years a Slave is the story of Solomon Northup, which is a true story, about an individual who was from New York. He was a free man, and he was under the fugitive slave law. He was kidnapped and sold into the South. And since he couldn't speak for himself and he had no ability to have any trial, he was just renamed and sold into slavery. The penalties would be, if a marshal refused to enforce the law, they would have to pay a fine. It led to massive abuses in the system. The number of abolitionists is going to increase. The operations of the Underground Railroad is going to become more efficient. In 1854, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin is going to declare the fugitive slave law unconstitutional. And other states are going to look at this as well. Out of all this, a book comes out called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harriet Beecher Stowe, who's a mother of 6, she helped runaway slaves via the Underground Railroad in Ohio. After a few years, she's going to move to the state of New York, and she's going to write a book that shows what happened to slavery in the world. And she's going to do this to show it to everyone. She took stories from various slaves that she helped, and she crafted her story from that. In the first year of sales, over 300,000 copies were sold in the north of the United States. It was banned in the South, but more than a million copies was sold in Great Britain. Even today, more copies of Uncle Tom's Cabin are sold outside of the United States than they are within the United States. So it is a very popular book. And so not much happens during Millard Fillmore's presidency. That kind of is the end of it. Our next president we're going to talk about is Franklin Pierce in section 12.3.